Recently, my grandmother Beryl died. Shed no tears. She was old and lived an amazing life. I was with her at the end. I sat by her bed, holding her frail hand and silently crying. She had slipped into a coma, and the odds of her coming out of it were slim. And Slim had left 10 minutes ago. Right before she left for good, her eyes fluttered open. She looked at me and whispered my name. I looked up, stunned that I could see her fading baby blues, and called out for my mum. My grandma beckoned me to come closer. I leaned as close to her as I could get, and in a tired, raspy voice she said, "I'm afraid I'll see him again." I asked who, but she shut her eyes and laid back down. Her internal clock slowed as her head hit the pillow. As soon as my mum came into the room, Grandma left us. I held my mum, and we cried into each other's shoulders until our shirts were soaked. Not my best day. When Mum and I went through Grandma's things, I told her what Grandma had said to me right before she expired. I asked if she had any idea what she was talking about. Mum was silent for a beat, but then shook her head no. Who knows what was going on inside her mind right before the end? I don't think it was anything specific. Is this related to her moving to Iowa all those years ago? This had been a sticking point between my family and I since I found out about it. My family had been born and raised in Minnesota for generations before Grandma had up and left one night years ago. She never talked about it. Once I learned this weird fact, I asked her. She would always dodge the answer, typically by promising me ice cream. What can I say? I'm bought off cheap. But with her gone, I thought this might be the time to learn the family secret. Why had Grandma left Minnesota? Why the big secret? Who was she worried she'd see again? I knew my mum wouldn't answer, if she even knew, but I held out hope my grandma had journaled about these experiences. Grandma was an avid journalist, but unlike most people, she didn't write her daily musing like they were a list of things she'd accomplished. No, she wrote them like she was telling a story. More than once, my mum caught me engrossed in a journal instead of cleaning the house. My mum punished me by assigning me to clothes donation duty. She hardly missed a day, and there were boxes of journals in her closets. Her will said she wanted them given over to the University of Iowa. She thought maybe they'd learn something from her daily writings. What life was like for a quasi-radical middle American housewife during the country's golden age. We were finishing up moving these boxes around when I noticed a small gap in the timeline of the journals. The ones from around the time she'd fled Minnesota were missing. I informed Mum about it, and she gave me one of Grandma's patent non-answers. I wasn't satisfied with that response, though. Worse, Mum didn't even promise me ice cream. Later that night, I went looking for the lost journals. I hoped I'd find answers to questions I asked for 20 years. I went through her entire bedroom with a fine-tooth comb and found zilch. Less than zilch. It was as if these things had just vanished. It was possible she burned it, but Grandma had hoarder tendencies, and I couldn't see her doing that. These dumb journals were gone. Out of frustration, I kicked the inside of her closet wall. My foot easily broke through the drywall. I started coughing from the particulates in the air. My spasming lungs would not keep me from seeing the hole I'd just booted in the wall. As I got closer, I realized I hadn't kicked through drywall. It was foam made to look like drywall. Inside, I found the journals I had been looking for. I devoured them in one sitting. A lot of my questions found answers. That said, those answers just spawned more questions. Questions I knew no one in my circle, not even my mum, could answer. So I throw it out to you, Reddit. What the hell happened here? If anyone knows anything about the group my grandma's ex started, please let me know. May 2nd, 1961. I think the Lord just spoke to me. Paul, my loving husband of 10 years, told me this as soon as he entered our apartment. I looked up from my paperback and stared at him, waiting for the punchline, but it never came. He was being serious. I didn't realize how serious until I saw that he had tears in his eyes. "What?" was all I could think to say. "I heard the word," he said, his voice catching. He spoke to me. Paul was not the most religious man. Sure, we went to church on Sundays, but neither of us would call ourselves devout. He'd always grouse about missing the first few innings of the Twins games. The Twins were his new obsession. They'd just moved from Washington, and Paul was worried that if the city didn't embrace them, they might leave for greener pastures. As for myself, I'd been feeling a serious spiritual disconnect from the church for years, and was going now out of obligation and not faith. Not that I would tell anyone that publicly. You couldn't go around talking about how you didn't believe in God in Minneapolis in the year of our Lord 1961. That's a good way of losing your invite to Bunko night. Start from the beginning, I said, still confused. I was closing up the shop, he said, and I had gone into the basement to make sure the sidewalk cellar door was locked, and I heard someone say, "I am the truth," as clear as day. Maybe someone was on the street. You can hear people through the cellar door, I said. I thought that too, but there wasn't anyone out there. Why do you think it was Jesus? Who else would call themselves the truth? Why would he tell you? I don't know, but I know I heard it. What do you want to do? I asked, unsure of how to handle this. My mother told me all kinds of tips and hints about having a happy marriage. Be loyal, make him comfortable, be his biggest supporter, learn how to make his favorite cocktail, etc. But there had never been any discussions on what to do if your husband hears uttering from the divine. I don't know, he said. He touched my soul. Beryl, I need a drink, I think. That I can do, I said, putting down my book and heading to the bar. He sat on the couch, but he was a million miles away. Something had happened, but I didn't think Jesus made house calls. I gave him a heavy paw, hoping it'd relax him. When Paul latches onto something, it can consume him to the point where he forgets to do basic things like eat and sleep. Jesus Christ spoke to me tonight, he said out loud, but mostly to himself. I am the truth. What do you think that means? Maybe you can talk to Father Jones, I said as I handed him his drink. If anyone else has potentially heard the Lord speak, my money is on him. Paul thanked me for the booze and gulped most of it down in one swig. I could tell he was inside his own head, and any attempt at conversation would be met with silence or anger. I grabbed my book and mentioned taking a quick bath before bed. I left him contemplating his spiritual awakening. I was at a good part in my book anyway. May 9th, 1961. I thought the Jesus stuff would pass, but he still focused on it a week later. He hadn't had another conversation with the Lord, but he did speak to Father Jones. The old priest listened to Paul's whole story patiently and offered him some pretty milquetoast answers. We all hear the word. Make sure you heed it. Following in Jesus' footsteps is not bad advice to follow. Paul left unfulfilled. The following day, he went to the library and checked out 6 books on Christianity and prophecy. He focused on others who'd heard from Jesus or God. I popped into the pharmacy before leaving to run errands. I was surprised to find Paul hunched over an open book, furiously scribbling notes onto a pad. I couldn't help but chuckle. Paul pulled his head out of the book and met my eyes. What are you reading? Book on prophets, he said. A lot of them heard an audible voice too. Are there any outside witnesses that can corroborate that claim? I asked, and my old university studies came back to me. I believe them. I wouldn't have a week ago, but... He trailed off. What happened to these prophets? Some went on to start their own church. Some became disillusioned with humans and fled to nature. Some went crazy and killed themselves or others. It's a mixed bag. Well, thank God you were just a one-off. The thought of living in nature after we spent our savings getting this apartment and storefront makes me queasy. Oh, and not being part of a murder-suicide thing is nice too. Beryl, please. I was going to respond, but he dove back into his book. I rolled my eyes and left. I didn't mind when Paul got obsessed with things. It's part of his charm. But I wasn't a fan of this current obsession. Somewhat ironically, I prayed he'd end it soon and come back to his senses. May 17th, 1961. 2 days later, Paul had to go to a conference 2 towns over. He didn't want to go, said he felt bad putting me out. I said it was nonsense, plus we'd already paid for a hotel room. He reluctantly left, and I watched over the store. I'd worked in the pharmacy before and knew what I was doing, but there was a Paul over the place this time. People weren't unkind, but weren't friendly either. It felt like being at a funeral. Later, when I retired to my apartment, I heard something moving in the shop. I pressed my ear to the ground to hear better. Sure enough, it sounded like someone was rifling through things. I didn't panic. I simply called the police, grabbed the scariest-looking knife I had, double-checked my locks, and waited for them to arrive. They checked out the store and said a few boxes had fallen, but everything else seemed to be in order. I went down with them and confirmed. They asked about my husband, and I told him where he had gone. They said they'd return tomorrow to talk to him about it before leaving. I watched them drive off when something outside caught my eye. It was the cellar doors to the storage area. One of them had been pushed open. The police would have seen that during their inspection, so I assumed they had popped them up to check the alley and just left it open. I went into the storage room and saw the lights from the street lamps reflecting on the cellar stairs. I hustled across the room and quickly shut and locked the doors. As I turned to go back up, I felt something caress my foot. I jumped up but didn't see anything. I heard a box fall to the ground next to me. I snapped my head in that direction in time to see the tail end of a giant rat scurry into the darkness. I started laughing. I'd been so keyed up that another person had been in here that I'd never even assumed it'd be a rat. The following day, Paul arrived and told me he found a dead rat outside the cellar door. He threw it in the trash and hoped no one had seen it. He told me its head was missing. May 23rd, 1961. He spoke to me again, Paul said. He told me, "Go forth and herd them." "Go forth and herd?" I asked. "Does that make you the shepherd?" No, he said, and I breathed a sigh of relief. Jesus is the shepherd. I'm more like the staff he wields. I keep the herd in line. Uh-huh, I said, not wanting to show my complete disapproval, but to let him know I have some reservations about this whole thing. Maybe you should start going to church twice a week, or see if you can volunteer. They're always looking for helpers for bingo and the Friday fish fry. I don't know, Paul said. Doesn't seem grand enough for someone hearing the Saviour's voice. Are you sure that's what it is? Not a radio or something? It's the word of the Lord. Beryl, he said sharply. I know the difference between Paul Harvey and Jesus. Okay, no need to get upset. Just looking for solutions. You do believe me, right? I let the question bounce around my skull before I blurted anything out. A yes from me would be a sign of encouragement. A no would crush his spirits. I needed an old-fashioned Minnesota nice answer that walks the line between both. I'm just making sure you're not rushing into anything is all. He laughed. If there was something to rush towards, it would be the open arms of Jesus. I needed to shift gears. This was fertile ground for a fight, and I wasn't in the mood. Hey, I was talking with Martha the other day and she wanted to know if we wanted to go a Twins game this weekend. I don't have time for games, he said. I want to finish this book about numerology in the Bible. Did you know the number 4 appears frequently in the book of Revelations? I need a drink. You? No, I need to stay sharp, he said. The word won't come to a man drunk on earthly pleasures. Uh-huh. I grabbed the bottle of rum. I contemplated just taking a long pull from the bottle, but I'm a lady, so I made myself a mixed drink and retired to the bedroom to get some quiet. June 3rd, 1961. 2 voices were coming up from the shop. There shouldn't have been 2 voices coming from the shop, especially after closing. I walked down to the pharmacy and found Paul deep in conversation with a bookish-looking fellow who seemed familiar. They both shut up as soon as I hit the bottom step. What's going on? I asked, trying to be as friendly as possible. This is Chuck. Hi, Chuck said. Are you a rep from one of the medical companies? I asked, confused. Nope, I actually buy my aspirin here. He's helping me with the biblical messages. I love mysteries, Chuck added. I told you about it the other night, about the messages in the book of Revelations. The number 4 thing. He laughed. Chuck laughed. I was confused. We've gone way beyond that, he said. We're discovering new stuff in here that corresponds with the recent messages. What recent messages? Paul hesitated. I doubled down and asked again. He smiled and asked if he could speak to me in the next aisle. What messages? I asked a third time. The Lord. He's speaking to me pretty frequently. What? I asked, laughing out of shock. It's daily. I wasn't supposed to tell you. Says who? Chuck. Paul waited for a beat and then pointed up at the sky. I decided to play dumb. The roofer. He said you'd mock me. I'm not mocking you, I said. I'm confused. And, quite frankly, when have I ever mocked you? Did you believe me? That's a different thing altogether. Did you know that, historically, the first supporter of a prophet is their spouse? But when a spouse doesn't believe, it causes issues within the marriage. Wait, I said, my anger rising. A prophet? Who else hears the word of the Lord but a prophet? You own and operate a local pharmacy. Paul, how does that make you a prophet? God selected me, and I heard. Simple as that. Not to mention, Jesus has recently shown me many things. You're having visions now? I asked incredulously. Not yet, but they've told me what passages in the Bible really mean. It's been an eye-opening experience. What has it said? It's a lot to go over. When the time is right to tell you, I will. Have you told Chuck? Which, also, what the hell is Chuck doing here? Beryl, language. Don't blaspheme. Saying hell isn't committing blasphemy, or did the voice not go over the proper grammar with you? I knew I'd stepped over the line, but didn't care. I was heated, and this little obsession was getting out of hand. I mean, there was a convert in my house now. He said you'd act like this. Paul said, the doubts of the unbelievers can cloud my mind. What did the last voice say? You're just going to insult me, he said, which you shouldn't do in general, but especially not in front of Chuck. Fine, I said, I promise I won't insult you. Paul sighed. He told me my first sheep would find its way to me. The next day, Chuck saw what I was reading and started asking questions. Before we knew it, he agreed to help work on this with me. Uh-huh. You said you won't insult me. I haven't, I said, biting my tongue so hard I drew blood. I could taste the metallic tang in my mouth. Go on. Paul smiled. I think he's my first sheep. Where do you hear the voices? In the basement, near the cellar door. I'm going down there, I said, to see if I hear anything. You won't, he said. I'm still trying. I walked out of the aisle, shot Chuck a warm smile, and headed down the basement stairs to storage. As I made my way down, I heard Paul tell Chuck that I was having some womanly issues and should be fine. I promised myself I would give the prophet Paul a good punch in the arm later. I walked down into the basement storage area and flipped on the light. I hated coming down here at the best of times, but it was the worst at night. It was already so dark in this room, and the lack of sunlight streaming through the slight cracks in the cellar door made it 10 times worse. But I was bound in the armor of a doubting Thomas, so I pushed my fears aside and made my way over to where Paul hears his divine messages. I stood for 10 minutes not making a sound. No voice spoke to me. No God, Jesus, or Jack Benny. All remained as quiet as a prayer. I rolled my eyes and headed back upstairs to the apartment. I wanted to get a head start on giving Paul the cold shoulder. June 10th, 1961. A week later, besides a Chuck, there was now a Greg, a Dan, a Dawn, a Joy, and a Tom. Most of these people were customers, but Joy and Tom were Chuck's friends. He told them what he and Paul had been doing, and they were intrigued. So they started coming too. They wouldn't be the last. More and more strangers moved through my life. The after-work gatherings became an everyday thing, and their tenor changed. When only Chuck was hanging around, he and Paul seemed to discuss biblical prophecy and the voices Paul heard, but now that a congregation was in the basement, the meetings took on a different tenor. Paul spoke like he was preaching to them, and the group ate it up. They looked at him like he had answers to their problems. He called them Paulites, and they responded well to it. I couldn't get this man to put his dishes in the sink, yet these people thought he knew the answers to cosmic mysteries. I was floored. Paul never told me about the new messages. I asked once, and he said the voices told him to spare the message from non-believers. I asked him when I had been shifted to non-believer status, and he didn't elaborate. I tried a few times to coax a message from the voice in the basement, but rolled a snake eyes every time. Paul had been more distant in the last week. At first I was okay with it because he seemed to enjoy himself, but the meetings started running to midnight, and I got lonely. I tried to go down there once or twice, but he always told me to head up. I'd be bored. I said I was curious, but he turned me away. I talked to Mum about it, and she said it's odd, but most men need a hobby they share with friends. She reminded me that Daddy was a member of the lodge and would hang out with those guys a few nights a week. What Paul was doing seemed similar, if not more church-related. She said it was good that you knew where and who he was with. I couldn't disagree, but it still sat funny with me. That seed of a funny feeling soon bloomed into a flowering issue when I heard Paul and Chuck discussing how many cots they could fit in the storeroom. I didn't want to interrupt them while they were talking, but I did sit on the stairs and listen. Paul said it would be better for the disciples to stay here. Chuck said he could easily build 2 or 3 rooms with the space down here if Paul was willing to shuffle around the boxes. Paul said that wouldn't be an issue. He also told Chuck he wanted to build a shrine to the voice. A holy site, he called it. Chuck said that wouldn't be an issue. After the group had left, I confronted Paul. I asked him what was going on and why he was going to build bedrooms downstairs. He said I wasn't allowed to know as I was not a member of the Immaculate Voice of the Lord. I said, as the leaseholder of the pharmacy, I had every right to know. I'd contact the city about code violations if he didn't tell me. Paul relented. He told me he'd discovered hidden messages in the Book of Revelations thanks to the Lord's clues. As he told people, he found that some truly believed him. The group started as Bible study, but quickly became one that felt the need to splinter away from any known doctrines and strike out on their own. The more formal churches were just parroting back words and beliefs from ancient voices. His church was getting the words straight from the horse's mouth. I didn't judge. but I did ask why he felt he couldn't share this with his wife. Had I not initially encouraged his passion project? Why was he keeping these secrets from me? He hemmed and hawed, but after some more precision-targeted questions, he finally spilled the beans. The voice told him to not tell me. I asked why Jesus would tell Paul to spread the word about his religion, but not tell his wife. He said the voice told him I would do anything to stop the church from forming. The day of cleansing would never come if I was successful. Day of cleansing, I asked. It's the day when the truth is revealed to the world. The non-believers will... Well, that's not important. No, you need to say. He sighed. They die and are sent to hell. You want me to go to hell? No. I want you to come along with me, but I'm being blocked from including you. The voice says that you don't have enough faith. You ask too many questions. Paul, darling, are you sure there even is a voice? He started laughing. The Lord said you'd say that. It's why I can't preach to you. Your doubt encapsulates you like unholy armor. There is no way to penetrate it. I think I'm going to stay at my mum's house, I said, slowly backing away from him. I need some time to think. Please don't, he said, his tone changing. I can teach you my ways and school you in the education of the Immaculate Voice doctrine. It'll bring us closer, both in this life and the next. His eyes were pleading, and I, again, saw the face of the boy I had fallen for all those years ago. My body wanted to embrace him, but my brain held firm. I'll stay tonight, okay? But no promises about tomorrow. Tomorrow you'll take us into your heart, he said, smiling. I love you. Let's get some sleep, huh? Yeah. June 11th, 1961. I reached over in the middle of the night and felt an empty space next to me. Paul was gone. I looked around, but he wasn't in the apartment. I assumed he was downstairs, either in the pharmacy or the storeroom. I prayed it was the pharmacy, but I knew where I'd find him. I moved as silently as a ghost until I got to the shop floor. It was pitch black outside, save for the lampposts that lined the street. They gave the avenue an orange glow that most people never see, because most decent people are asleep at this hour. I walked toward the door to the storeroom and found it already opened. A light was on down there, and I heard mumbling, but couldn't make out any words. I softly took the first few steps, making sure I didn't give away my position. Paul's voice was still muffled, but I could hear every other word. It seemed he was talking to someone, but I never heard another voice speak back. Then I realized he was probably talking with the voice. I made my way down the stairs and ducked behind some of the boxes of medicine. If he really looked, he'd spot me easily, but overlook me if he just glanced. I settled in and cocked my ear toward him. What I heard from him made the blood drain from my face and my body shake. If she leaves, who will we use to secure your arrival? Without her body, you cannot rise. There was silence for a few seconds until Paul started laughing. It wasn't the fun, friendly chuckle I had swooned over during study sessions in poli-sci. It was maniacal. Thy will be done, Father. With that, Paul shut off the light and walked back upstairs. Sitting alone in the dark, I realized two things. My marriage was obviously over, and the Paulites were going to kill me. I needed to go, now. The quickest way out was through the cellar doors. I'd figure out the details later, but fleeing this nightmare was paramount. As quietly as possible, I undid the latches and pushed open the metal doors, stepping half up the ladder to softly lay them on the sidewalk. Before leaving, though, I looked back at the room and spat. Till death do us part. No thanks. You can have him. The air around me becomes charged. It made my skin tingle. From the dark void of the room, I heard a deep voice croak. Your end is here, child. Fuscus locutus est. I took Latin in college and had attended church since I could walk. This wasn't Jesus or God or anything holy speaking to Paul. He was being deceived. Jesus doesn't call himself the Dark One, but I knew who did. As my brain tried to reconcile this information, a bloody, severed rat head landed square on my foot. I charged up those stairs and out onto the street. I ran as far as my lungs would take me. All I heard were my bare feet slapping on the sidewalk and deep, evil laughter echoing from the basement. I never looked back. There was nothing I wanted to see anyway. I had been sitting at home, flipping through a magazine and half watching TV, when my phone rang. The woman on the other end sounded frantic, almost too eager to secure a sitter for the night. Her voice, tight with urgency, made me hesitate at first, but the pay she offered was hard to ignore. Please, she had said, I just need someone reliable, just for tonight. I'd agreed. But as I hung up the phone, a strange feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. It was a babysitting job, nothing more. So why did I feel so uneasy? The house stood at the end of a long, winding driveway, hidden among tall, dark trees. It wasn't the kind of house you'd expect to feel unsettling at first glance. It was modern, clean, and neatly kept, but something about the place felt wrong, even before I stepped inside. The windows were dark and reflective, catching the last fading light of the evening sky. I felt a strange heaviness as I stood outside, staring up at the house. I knocked, and within moments, Mrs. Winters opened the door. She was tall and thin, her blonde hair pulled back into a tight bun. Her dress, a soft blue, was elegant, but a little too formal for a quiet evening at home. Her face was a mask of politeness, with just a hint of something unreadable behind her eyes. "Thank you for coming," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "I know it's last minute." The house was warm, but not in a welcoming way. The air felt stifling, heavy. The scent of lavender lingered, but it couldn't mask something else underneath, something faint, like old wood or damp air. "No problem," I replied, forcing a smile as I stepped inside. Mrs. Winters gestured toward the staircase, but then turned to me, her voice lowering. "Before you go upstairs, there are a few important rules you need to follow." She handed me a piece of paper, the edges worn, like it had been folded and unfolded many times. The rules were written in neat, slanted handwriting. "Do not open the window in Daniel's room. If you hear knocking at the door, do not answer it. Keep the closet door in Daniel's room closed at all times. Do not go into the basement for any reason." The list of rules made my stomach twist a little. "These are rather specific," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Mrs. Winters' eyes flickered to the staircase again before she looked back at me. "Just follow the rules, and you'll be fine." She didn't wait for me to ask anything else. She grabbed her coat from a nearby chair, gave me a tight smile, and hurried out the front door. The click of the door shutting echoed louder than it should have. For a moment I stood in the foyer, staring down at the list in my hand. The rules felt odd. No, they felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on why. Taking a deep breath, I folded the paper and tucked it into my pocket before heading upstairs. Daniel's room was at the end of a long, dim hallway. The door was slightly open, and the light from inside spilled out in a thin line across the floor. I knocked softly, pushing the door open a little more. Daniel sat on the edge of his bed, his dark hair falling into his eyes. He didn't look up when I entered. "Hi, Daniel," I said gently, stepping inside. He didn't respond, just sat there, staring at the wall across from him. His small hands clutched the edge of the bed, his knuckles pale. The room itself was neat, but something about it felt off. The air was colder than the rest of the house, and there was a strange stillness to everything, like the room had been frozen in time. I glanced at the closet door. It was closed, just as the rule had instructed. For some reason, the sight of it sent a chill down my spine. "Do you want to play a game or read before bed?" I asked, trying to break the silence. Daniel shook his head slowly, still not looking at me. "You can't open the window." The bluntness of his words startled me. "I know, I won't open it." "She doesn't like it when it's closed," he added quietly, almost to himself. I frowned, my heart beating a little faster. Who doesn't like it? Daniel's grip on the bed tightened, but he didn't answer. His eyes flickered briefly toward the closet door, then back to the window. The silence in the room grew heavier. I could hear the faint ticking of a clock from somewhere downstairs, the only sound in the house. I sat down in the chair near his bed, trying to shake the strange sense of dread settling over me. "Are you okay?" I asked, unsure of what else to say. Daniel finally looked at me, his dark eyes wide and unnervingly calm. "She comes when it's dark." I blinked, unsure if I had heard him correctly. "Who comes?" He didn't answer, just turned back toward the window. The air felt colder now, almost suffocating. I glanced toward the window, half expecting to see someone standing outside, but the glass was empty, reflecting only the dim light from inside the room. Minutes passed, the quiet stretching unnaturally. I found myself staring at the closet door again, the simple instruction on the list playing over in my mind. Keep it closed. But why? What could possibly be in a child's closet that would require such a rule? Without warning, Daniel crossed the room and stood in front of the window, his face inches from the glass. My heart skipped a beat as I stood up, remembering the first rule. Do not open the window in Daniel's room. "Daniel!" I called softly, trying to keep my voice steady. "Please step away from the window." He didn't respond right away. My pulse quickened as I took a step closer, my mind racing with the rule. Why wasn't I allowed to open the window? What would happen if I did? "Daniel, you need to stay away from the window," I said more firmly this time. Slowly, Daniel turned to face me. His eyes were wide, but there was something off about his expression. He stared at me for a long moment, then shrugged and walked out of the room without a word. He was already in the hallway, his small figure disappearing around the corner. I hurried after him, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure what I expected him to do, but the house felt different now, like it was watching us. As I followed Daniel down the stairs, the floor creaked underfoot and the air grew colder. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, Daniel was standing in the foyer, staring at the front door. His hands were clenched at his sides, his head tilted slightly as if he was listening for something. "Hey, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice trembling. "She knocks sometimes," he said quietly, his eyes still fixed on the door. "But you can't open it. You know that, right?" I swallowed hard, trying to calm the rising panic in my chest. "Yes, I know. Come back upstairs, okay?" He ignored me, taking a step closer to the door. My pulse quickened. I took a deep breath and moved toward him, reaching out to take his hand. But before I could grab him, he spun around and darted toward the living room, moving faster than I expected. I followed him into the living room, my breath coming in shallow bursts. The room was dark, the curtains drawn tight. Daniel stood in the center of the room, staring at the fireplace. The embers from a fire long since extinguished flickered faintly, casting strange shadows on the walls. He moved toward the far corner of the room, where a small door was built into the wall. My heart sank as I realized what it was. The basement door. He just stared at me for a moment, then pulled away from my grasp and walked back toward the stairs. My legs felt weak as I stood there, staring at the basement door. When I caught up to him, he was already halfway up the stairs, his small hands trailing along the banister. He moved quietly, as if the house itself was watching him, waiting for something. Back upstairs, Daniel walked into his room without a word and sat down on the bed, his eyes once again drawn to the closet. The doors were still closed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was moving behind it. There was a faint, almost imperceptible noise coming from it, like the soft scrape of nails against wood. I forced myself to stay calm, my eyes flicking to the window. It was shut tight, the curtains still. "Daniel, what's inside the closet?" I asked, my voice serious. "She is," Daniel whispered. The third rule said to keep the closet door in Daniel's room closed at all times, but I felt a strong, unnatural pull to open the doors. I had to see what was inside. My hands were shaking as I moved toward the closet door, and just as I reached it, a faint knock echoed through the house. My heart stopped. I looked at Daniel, who was now staring at the door with an expression that sent chills down my spine. The knock echoed through the house, soft at first but unmistakable. It wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made my stomach twist. I froze, remembering the second rule. If you hear, as I held Daniel in my arms, the weight of the night began to lift, though my heart raced with the aftershock of what had just happened. The basement, once filled with darkness, now felt empty, void of the malevolence that had permeated the air just moments before. Daniel's small frame shook against me, and I could feel the tension in his body starting to dissolve. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He pulled back slightly, his dark eyes searching mine for reassurance. "I think so," he replied, his voice hoarse. "But where did she go?" I looked toward the now silent corner of the basement, half expecting to see the twisted figure materializing again. "She's gone, Daniel. I buried her. She won't come back." His brow furrowed as if he was still trying to comprehend what had just transpired. "But Mom said she was dead. I thought she was just gone." "Some spirits don't rest peacefully," I said softly, brushing a stray hair from Daniel's forehead. "But I think she's finally at peace now." I carefully helped him to his feet, and we climbed the stairs together, the air above feeling lighter with each step. I wanted to believe what I told him, that we had rid the house of a lingering shadow, but doubt crept into my mind. The night had been so surreal, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching us. As we reached the main floor, the lights flickered momentarily, causing both of us to pause. I instinctively squeezed Daniel's hand tighter. "It's okay," I said, though I felt the unease return. "Let's get you to bed." Daniel nodded, his gaze darting around the living room as if he expected to see someone lurking in the shadows. I led him back to his room, flicking on the light and closing the door behind us. "Can I keep the light on?" he asked, his voice small. "Of course," I replied, making my way to the bedside lamp and turning it on. A warm glow filled the room, illuminating the walls and the closet door that had felt so foreboding just moments before. "You can keep it on all night if you want." Daniel climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to his chin. I sat on the edge, watching him settle in. The weight of the night's events was still heavy on my shoulders, and I couldn't help but wonder if it was truly over. "Can you stay with me for a bit?" he asked, his eyes starting to flutter shut. "Absolutely," I replied, hoping to ease his fears. I tucked the blanket around him and sat back in the chair, keeping the light within my view. As the minutes passed, I couldn't help but replay the events of the evening in my mind. I thought of the unsettling rules Mrs. Winters had given me, each one a caution against the very dangers I had faced. What had driven her to leave her son with such strict orders? Had she known more than she let on? Daniel's breathing slowly turned steady and deep, and I found myself lost in thought, drifting between consciousness and the echoes of my own fears. Just as I was about to doze off, a soft knock broke the silence. I jolted upright, heart racing. The knock came again, faint yet deliberate, and my stomach twisted. It was coming from the closet. I glanced at Daniel, who remained oblivious to the sound, his face serene in sleep. My instincts screamed at me to ignore it, to let it be, but curiosity gripped me. What if there was still something left behind? What if the spirit had left something unfinished? "Daniel," I whispered, leaning over to shake him gently. "Wake up." His eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding his face. "What is it?" "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice low. He nodded, the sleep fading from his eyes. "It's her," he said simply, the calmness in his tone sending shivers down my spine. "No, she's gone," I insisted, but my voice wavered. I stood slowly, my heart pounding in my chest as I approached the closet. The knock came again, insistent, and my breath caught in my throat. I reached for the handle, hesitating just before I pulled it open. "Please," Daniel pleaded from behind me. "Don't, she's not done yet." I turned to look at him, fear reflected in his wide eyes. "But what if she's still trying to reach you?" Daniel shook his head vigorously. "I don't want to go back there." Before I could argue further, the door swung open of its own accord, revealing the darkness inside. My heart pounded as I peered into the abyss, trying to discern if anything was there. "Hello?" I called, my voice shaking. Nothing answered, only silence. I leaned in closer, squinting to see if I could make out any shapes or shadows. But as I did, a gust of wind rushed out from the closet, cold and sharp, pushing against my body and making the hairs on my arms stand on end. "Stop it!" I yelled, stepping back. The door swung shut on its own, and the sound echoed throughout the room. I looked back at Daniel, who was now sitting up in bed, his expression a mixture of fear and confusion. "What was that?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know," I admitted, feeling the dread creep back in. "But we need to stay calm. Let's just—" Before I could finish, the door to his room suddenly creaked open, and the air around us felt charged, electric. A figure appeared in the doorway, its silhouette framed by the hallway light. "Mom?" Daniel's voice was barely a whisper, but I could hear the hope in it. "Daniel." The voice that came through was sweet, yet tinged with something darker, something that sent a chill through my bones. "I've missed you." I rushed in front of Daniel instinctively, my heart racing as I faced the figure. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. The figure stepped closer, and I could see the resemblance to Mrs. Winters, but the expression on her face was one of pure malice. "I'm your aunt, dear. I've always been here, waiting for you." "Stay back," I shouted, raising my hands as if to ward her off. "Why did you bury me?" she hissed, her eyes darkening. "You think you can escape me? You've only made it worse." Daniel gasped, his hands clutching the sheets tightly. "No, you're not my aunt." The figure turned her gaze toward him, a twisted smile forming on her lips. "Oh, but I am. Your mother tried to keep me away, but I will always find a way back." I felt a surge of adrenaline rush through me. "You're not welcome here. You can't have him." With a sudden movement, I lunged for the closet door again, determined to close it once and for all. But before I could reach it, the spirit lunged forward, her twisted form moving unnaturally fast. "Daniel!" I shouted, and he scrambled off the bed, backing away toward the far wall. "Get away from him!" I yelled, my heart pounding as I felt the air grow colder around us. In that moment, I knew I had to protect him, to keep him safe from the darkness that threatened to consume us both. I reached for the old vase I had buried earlier, still fresh in my mind. "Daniel, stay back!" I yelled, grabbing the nearest object I could find, a heavy lamp, and swung it at the spirit, my instincts taking over. The lamp collided with her form, and for a brief moment I saw the flash of surprise in her eyes before she dissipated into the shadows. "Run!" I shouted, and we bolted for the door. As we raced down the hallway, the air thickened, the house shaking as if responding to her fury. "You can't escape me!" the voice echoed behind us, a cold wind chasing us down the stairs. We burst through the front door and into the night, stumbling onto the driveway as I turned to look back at the house. The windows glowed ominously, dark figures dancing behind them, a sinister reminder of the evil that lurked within. "Keep running," I urged, grabbing Daniel's hand as we sprinted down the driveway, the night air biting at our skin. We didn't stop until we reached the end of the street, gasping for breath. I turned to Daniel, whose wide eyes searched mine for answers. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know," I admitted, panic rising in my chest. "But we need to get to safety. We need help." As we ran toward the nearest neighbor's house, the darkness behind us seemed to throb with anger, as if the house itself was reaching out to reclaim what it had lost. "Don't look back," I said, my heart pounding as we reached the porch. I pounded on the door, adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Please, someone help us!" The door swung open, revealing an elderly couple who looked taken aback by our sudden appearance. "What on earth?" the woman began, but I pushed past her, dragging Daniel inside. "We need help," I repeated, my voice shaking. "What's going on?" the elderly man asked, his brow furrowing in concern. "There's something in my house," I stammered, trying to catch my breath. "A spirit. She's trying to take my brother. We buried her, but she came back." The couple exchanged worried glances, and the woman stepped forward, placing a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Oh, dear. You must be terrified. Come in, both of you." I hesitated, glancing back at the dark street, half expecting to see the twisted figure emerge from the shadows. "We can't stay outside. We need to call for help." "Calm down, sweetheart," the woman said, gently leading us inside. "Let's sit down and figure this out. You're safe here." Once inside, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. The cozy living room felt like a sanctuary compared to the malevolent energy of my home. Daniel clung to my side, his small frame trembling. "Can you tell us what happened?" the elderly man asked, his tone steady as he guided us to a pair of chairs. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. "We were in the basement. I thought we got rid of her, but she came back, claiming to be my brother's aunt. I just know she wants him." The couple listened intently, and the woman's expression shifted from concern to a knowing sadness. "Some spirits can be very powerful. They can manipulate emotions, and they often feed on fear." "Feed on fear?" I echoed, feeling a knot of dread form in my stomach. "Yes," she continued, "they thrive on the energy of fear and sadness. It makes them stronger." Daniel's eyes widened, and he pulled closer to me. "But how do we stop her?" "First, you need to protect yourselves," the man said, his voice low and serious. "We can help you with that." The woman nodded and rose from her chair. "Let me get some things." She disappeared into another room, leaving us with the man, who leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Listen carefully. Spirits like that often have ties to the living. You may have to confront her directly to sever those ties." "Confront her?" I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. "Yes, but you have to be strong. Fear gives her power, and she'll use it against you. You must remain calm and focused." Daniel looked up at me, his small face pale. "What if I can't?" "You can," I said firmly, squeezing his hand. "We'll do it together." The woman returned, carrying a small box filled with herbs, candles, and other items I didn't recognize. "These will help you create a protective barrier," she said, setting the box down on the coffee table. "We can light a cleansing candle and burn some herbs to purify the space." "What do we do?" I asked, feeling a mix of fear and determination. "First, we'll need to create a circle," she explained, pulling out a handful of salt. "Salt can protect against negative energies. We'll make a circle around the room, and then light the candle while saying a protective chant." As she demonstrated, I felt a sense of purpose begin to rise within me. I needed to protect Daniel at all costs, and this might be our only chance. We worked quickly, pouring the salt in a circle around the room, Daniel helping as best as he could. I could see his small hands shaking, but he was focused, determined. Once the circle was complete, the woman lit the candle, its warm glow casting flickering shadows across the walls. "Now, close your eyes and take a deep breath," she instructed. "Visualize the light surrounding you and protecting you." I followed her instructions, feeling Daniel's small hand in mine. I closed my eyes and focused on the flame, allowing the warmth to fill me. The night's events played over in my mind, each detail sharpening as I tried to prepare myself for what was to come. "Repeat after me," the woman said, her voice steady. "By the light of this candle, I command any spirits who mean harm to leave this space." "By the light of this candle, I command any spirits who mean harm to leave this space," I echoed, feeling a surge of energy as I said the words. "Leave this child and this home," she continued, and I could hear Daniel's shaky voice following mine. "Leave this child and this home." The candle flickered as if responding to our words, and I felt a breeze sweep through the room, sending chills down my spine. "We banish you," the woman declared, her voice growing stronger. "You have no power here." "Go away," Daniel shouted, his voice rising in defiance. Suddenly the lights flickered, and I felt a cold draft sweep through the room, snuffing out the candle momentarily. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay focused. "We can do this," I whispered to Daniel, squeezing his hand tighter. As the candle reignited, the shadows around us seemed to dance more wildly, and I could feel the presence of the spirit pressing in, trying to penetrate our protective barrier. "Stay strong," the man urged, his voice steady as he joined in. "We are safe here." "Stay strong, we are safe here," Daniel echoed, his voice gaining strength. The temperature dropped even further, and I could see my breath forming in the air. "You cannot have him!" I shouted, drawing on every ounce of courage I had left. In that moment I felt the spirit's rage, a rush of cold air that enveloped me, but I didn't falter. "Leave him alone!" The shadows coalesced, forming into the twisted figure of Mrs. Winters, her eyes glowing with fury. "You think you can keep him from me?" she hissed, her voice like ice scraping against metal. "Yes," I shouted, holding my ground. "You are not welcome here. You have no power over us." With every ounce of strength I could muster, I stepped forward, breaking the circle momentarily, and I felt Daniel's hand slipping from mine. "Daniel!" I cried out, fear clenching at my heart as I reached for him. "Stay away from him!" the spirit roared, lunging toward my brother, but before she could reach him, the woman threw herbs into the flame. A blinding light erupted from the candle, illuminating the room and pushing back the darkness. "Begone!" she shouted, her voice strong and commanding. The light enveloped us, and I felt a force pulling at my chest as if the spirit was trying to fight against the barrier we had created. "You are not his family. You don't belong here." The spirit let out a piercing scream, and for a moment everything went still. Then, just as quickly, the figure disintegrated into swirling shadows, the cold dissipating into warm air. The candle flickered once more before settling into a steady flame, illuminating the room with a sense of calm. We stood there, breathless and wide-eyed, the reality of what had just happened settling in. "It's over," the woman said softly, a relieved smile breaking across her face. Daniel looked up at me, his eyes filled with tears, and I knelt beside him, pulling him into a tight embrace. "You were so brave," I whispered, feeling a wave of pride wash over me. "I was scared," he admitted, his voice muffled against my shoulder. "I know," I replied, holding him tighter, "but we did it. We're safe now." The elderly couple exchanged glances, a sense of relief evident on their faces as well. "You both are very strong," the man said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "It takes courage to face such darkness." "Thank you for helping us," I replied, still trying to catch my breath. "We'll stay here a bit longer," the woman suggested, "just to make sure everything remains calm." As the warmth of the candlelight surrounded us, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, and the night felt less oppressive. Though I knew the memory of the spirit would linger, we had reclaimed our safety, and Daniel would be okay. We spent the next hour talking quietly, the couple sharing stories of their own encounters with the supernatural. Daniel listened intently, his initial fear fading as curiosity took hold. But as the night wore on, a new concern began to creep in. "What if she comes back?" Daniel asked, his voice small. "We have ways to protect ourselves," the woman reassured him. "You can always return to us if you feel her presence again." As the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, I felt a sense of hope beginning to take root. "We'll be okay, won't we?" I asked, my gaze flicking to the couple. "Yes," the man replied with a reassuring smile. "Just remember, you have the strength to face the darkness. It may come back, but you know how to fight it now." With that knowledge in mind, I held Daniel close, grateful for the warmth of the morning sun that chased away the last remnants of fear. Whatever darkness lay ahead, we would face it together. As the sun rose higher, illuminating the world outside, I knew we were finally free. Years ago, back when the town was first founded, there was a tragedy that would forever haunt its residents. The schoolhouse, a modest wooden structure that had barely seen a handful of classes, collapsed during a town meeting. The wooden beams creaked ominously before giving way, and chaos erupted as townsfolk scrambled to escape. The disaster claimed several lives, including that of the town's beloved priest. At the time, the town was still too new to have a proper graveyard, so the bodies were laid to rest in the forest at the edge of town. Each grave was marked by a maple tree, a living monument to the souls lost that fateful day. Though nearly 100 years had passed since that grim night, the forest still stood, a sprawling testament to the town's history. Over the decades, as the town grew around it, the forest became an open secret, a haunting presence that lingered in the shadows. No one, not even the big corporations that eventually moved in, dared to suggest building there. Everyone in town knew about the graves, but it was a topic shrouded in silence. My history teacher had once told us that if the town acknowledged the existence of the graves, they would have to change zoning laws and face the consequences of their past. So it remained unspoken, yet deeply embedded in our community's fabric. This year, as the first frost blanketed the town, it was finally time for the annual Senior Guard Night, a tradition that dated back to the rebuilding of the schoolhouse. On this night, seniors would venture into the woods, seeking out the graves and standing vigil over them. The weather forecast warned of rain after midnight, but we were determined to honor those who had come before us. As we entered the woods, the chill settled around us, and the sound of crunching leaves filled the air. Each step felt heavy with history, the weight of the past pressing down. Spotting the graves had become second nature for us. We had grown up under the shadows of those ancient trees. The trick was knowing which maple tree to look for, those of the right age, with their graceful trunks standing sentinel over the forgotten. The town may be small now, but back then it had been even smaller. With more students than there were graves, some of us had to double up. I had volunteered to take Jaden, the new kid, with me. Jaden walked beside me, his shoulders hunched as if trying to make himself smaller. He had hoped to team up with one of the girls, but fate had thrown him into my company instead. I could see the disappointment on his face. As I tried to explain the history, the significance of the vigil, I noticed he was more interested in his phone, scrolling aimlessly even though we had no service. Each time he stumbled over a root or rock, I felt a twinge of annoyance, but reminded myself he was still getting used to our town. As we neared our designated grave, I nudged Jaden to get his attention. The pale beam of my flashlight revealed the familiar sight of the aged maple tree. I dropped my backpack, hearing the rustle of our classmates gathering nearby, their footsteps muted by the soft earth. "Excuse me?" a voice called from a few trees away. "My lighter isn't working. Can someone help?" "Give me a moment," I replied, digging through my backpack. My brother had insisted I bring multiple ways to start a fire, and I was grateful for it as I pulled out a book of matches. Jaden shifted uncomfortably beside me. I glanced at him, trying to reassure him. "I'll be right back. You'll be fine." I made my way over to Bentley, who was crouched near her grave, flicking her lighter with increasing frustration. She jumped at my approach but relaxed upon recognizing me. "I know my lighter was working back at the house, but I can't get my hands steady enough to light it," she admitted, her voice quivering. "No worries." I squatted beside her. "Where's your candle?" "Right here." She held up a large glass candle, its decorative front showing a picturesque scene of sheets flapping in the breeze. "My mum packed me like 7 extra. She's worried about me." I forced a smile, trying to share in her relief. "My family is the same way. I don't think any of my candles smell this good, though." Bentley grinned back, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "At least I'm better off than Caleb. He brought tea candles." "Tea candles?" I raised an eyebrow as I struck a match, watching the flame dance briefly before catching the wick. "Those aren't going to last the whole night." She clutched her candle, the light casting a warm glow on her relieved expression. "He brought like 2 whole bags. He's not too worried." I handed her my matchbook as I stood, reminding her to have another way to light her candle just in case. "I wish we could have teamed up," she mumbled, her gaze drifting back to the grave. That wasn't particularly relevant to what was about to happen, but I felt it was important to mention, to remember how our small group had come together in the shadow of the forest. Returning to Jaden, I could sense his discomfort. With only 18 minutes until midnight, the air felt charged with anticipation. The only thing we had told him to bring besides his coat was a candle, but he sheepishly admitted he hadn't. My mum said I wasn't allowed to be out here with a lit candle. If it was that important, I could just play a video of a candle burning on my phone. Rolling my eyes, I fished out 2 beeswax candles from my backpack and handed one to him. He protested, but I promised I wouldn't tell his mum, and he finally fell silent. Without a second candle holder, I instructed him to hold it tilted away so the dripping wax wouldn't land on him, and we both lit our candles. All around us, little pinpricks of light flared as our classmates finished getting ready. The forest was eerily still as the last minutes crept by. I didn't need to check my watch to know when midnight struck. A low, mournful moan swept through the grass, and even through my thick layers, I felt a chill invade my bones. Conversations fell silent, and we braced ourselves for the night to come. Well, almost all of us. "The heck?" Jaden muttered, his face twisting with confusion. Then, without warning, the wind howled through the trees, rustling the leaves that still clung stubbornly to their branches. It built in strength, ripping at our clothes like an angry spirit. Through it all, my candle's flame remained unwavering, a tiny beacon in the tempest. "Dude," Jaden was practically in my face now, his candle dangerously close to mine. "What the hell is going on?" I shoved him back, harder than I intended. "I told you, these are graves. Graves outside of a cemetery." His expression shifted to horror as he absorbed the weight of my words. Just as suddenly as the wind had risen, it stopped, and mist began to creep through the underbrush, curling around our feet and rising to obscure our vision. "Cemetery, graves, whatever," I whispered urgently, my voice low and hurried. "They're consecrated, but they couldn't do that with this one because the priest died in the accident too. This means these graves are left without any protection." Jaden's eyes widened in fear. Protection from what? Before I could answer, the screaming began. It started at one end of the forest, then echoed from another side, until the whole woods was filled with an unholy cacophony. It sounded like my classmates, but I knew it wasn't them. Their lights flickered ahead, shining brightly through the mist and the trees. One particular scream pierced the air, unmistakably Bentley's voice. Jaden jerked away from me, instinctively moving toward her. I reached out, desperate to stop him from stepping off the grave, but stumbled as he halted abruptly. We tumbled down, and I saw his candle hit the ground just before mine did. In an instant, they both extinguished. The forest froze into painful stillness. The cold that had been creeping up my coat seized me fully, and I could feel something hovering over Jaden and me, a presence, dark and heavy. I knew it was my fault. I was supposed to protect him, to teach him about tonight's significance, but here I was, the one who had shoved us both into danger. I hunched over him, attempting to shield him even as I felt claws of pure ice slide through my coat and pierce my skin. I am the guardian of the lost graves." Bentley's voice, thin and shaky, rose through the night. "And so long as my fire burns, you will not touch the lost souls here." The claws hesitated but did not withdraw. I shivered uncontrollably, aware that when they reached my heart, it would stop. "I am the guardian of the lost graves," Caleb's voice rang out, desperate and determined. The claws slipped past a rib, and I could feel them digging into my very essence. All around us, voices flared up, my classmates shouting to hold back the darkness as best they could, fighting to protect what they could, but I could tell it wasn't enough. Beneath me, Jaden moved, and I pulled back instinctively. If this creature got through me, he would be next. He needed to get away. Maybe he could escape if he got far enough, but I couldn't let him go without a fight. I felt the icy grip tighten around my heart, and a primal instinct surged within me, urging me to act. "Jaden!" I shouted, forcing my voice to rise above the din of terrified cries and the oppressive silence that seemed to swallow the night. "Get to the others! You have to light your candle!" But he was frozen, staring wide-eyed at the creeping shadows, a mix of terror and confusion etched on his face. "What's happening?" His voice trembled, barely a whisper. In that moment, the weight of the forest pressed down upon us, the branches above swaying as if the trees themselves were breathing with malevolent intent. The mist curled around our legs, rising higher as the wails of our classmates faded into a haunting echo. "I don't know," I gasped, fighting to breathe against the cold that seemed to seep into my very bones. "But we have to." A sudden flare of light erupted nearby, and I turned just in time to see Bentley's candle reigniting with a fierce glow. It stood defiantly against the encroaching shadows, illuminating her pale face, twisted with determination. "Together! We must stand together!" Bentley's voice rang clear, strong against the chaos. "Hold your candles high. We can push back the darkness." The sight of her strength reignited something inside me. I grasped Jaden's arm, shaking him out of his stupor. "We have to go, now!" With a burst of energy, I pulled him along as I stumbled back toward the flickering lights of our classmates. The path was shrouded in mist, but the faint glow of their candles guided us like beacons in the night. "Hold on to your candle," I urged, forcing Jaden to raise it high above his head. "We need to protect the light." As we hurried, I could feel the claws still lingering, hesitant to retreat, and I shuddered as a sharp cold grazed my skin. The air vibrated with an eerie hum, as if the forest itself were alive, feeding on our fear. Ahead I spotted Caleb, his candle ablaze and illuminating the area around him. "This way! We can form a circle!" he called out, his voice cutting through the tension. The group began to converge, each face a mask of fear and determination. We linked arms, forming a human chain, candles raised high, surrounding Bentley's glowing flame. The mist thickened, swirling around our feet like serpents, but the warmth of our candles pushed back against the dark. "I can feel it," Bentley shouted, her eyes locked onto the shadows. "It's afraid. We have to keep our light together." The shadows writhed at the edges of our circle, and I could feel their malevolence pressing in, trying to extinguish our fragile hope. "Don't let go! Hold tight!" I yelled, feeling the pulse of energy from our combined lights. The force of our unity pushed back, and the darkness recoiled slightly. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. With every heartbeat, our determination surged, and the shadows trembled, losing their grip on the night. "Now!" Bentley commanded. "On 3, we raise our candles and shout together. We won't let them take our light." We counted down, our voices uniting in a powerful chant that echoed through the trees. 1, 2, 3! "Get away from our graves!" The sound erupted from us like a shockwave, shaking the forest to its core. Light burst forth from our candles, illuminating the darkness, pushing it back like a tide retreating from the shore. The claws that had been clutching at my heart recoiled, hissing as they vanished into the mist. But the victory was fleeting. Just as the shadows began to retreat, a sudden chill washed over us, freezing the air. A guttural growl resonated from the depths of the forest, a warning of what was still to come. "Stay focused," Caleb shouted, his voice steady despite the panic in his eyes. "We have to keep the light. We can't let them take us." I could see the fear reflected in everyone's eyes, but I also saw the determination. We would not allow our town's history to overshadow our future. With every ounce of strength we held our candles high, refusing to let the darkness reclaim its power. The growl intensified, shaking the very ground beneath our feet. I felt a surge of desperation rise within me. I had to protect Jaden, to protect all of us. I glanced at him, his face pale, candle trembling in his grip. "Jaden, remember why we're here," I urged, squeezing his hand. "This night is about honoring those who were lost. We can't let them be forgotten. They need us to remember." He met my gaze, and for a moment I saw the flicker of understanding ignite in his eyes. "You're right. We have to stand for them." With renewed vigor, we tightened our grip on each other, forming an unbreakable bond against the encroaching darkness. The forest trembled, the air thick with energy as we prepared for one final push. "On 3 again," Bentley called, her voice ringing with confidence. 1, 2, 3. "Get away from our graves." The force of our voices surged through the trees, and for a moment it felt like the very essence of the forest responded. The shadows shrieked, a sound that echoed in my mind, twisting my thoughts. They clawed at our collective light, but we held firm, pushing back with every ounce of willpower we possessed. Suddenly, a brilliant flash erupted from the center of our circle, blinding in its intensity. The darkness writhed violently, dissipating in waves, retreating from the light. I squinted against the brilliance, feeling a warm glow spread through my body as the shadows fell away, banished into the depths of the forest. With a final deafening wail, the last remnants of the darkness evaporated into nothingness, leaving the woods eerily silent. We stood together, panting and shaken, our candles still flickering valiantly. The mist that had once cloaked us had lifted, revealing the clear night sky filled with stars. Jaden and I exchanged a look, the fear replaced by an understanding that we had faced something beyond ourselves, something that would bond us forever. As we gathered our things, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. We had honored the memories of those who had come before us, and in doing so, had forged a stronger connection to each other and our town. The forest, once a place of fear, had transformed into a sanctuary, a reminder of our shared history and the strength we possessed when united. As we made our way back to town, I knew that the vigil would live on in our hearts, a testament to the power of remembrance and the light we could bring to even the darkest of places. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.